Alright, so this weekend I wanted to talk about, I guess, animated movies or half-animated movies with a sort of detective theme, which is mainly an excuse to talk about these two movies, really. We did actually get a suggestion from Brian, who we usually talk to in the awards videos, who had suggested that because of The Lion King coming out, that we should do the 1994 Stephen Sommers movie against Favreau's movie from 2016. But unfortunately, I was not informed of that until I had already prepared this one. But even though The Lion King has passed, that is something that I do, that is probably one that I want to do before too long, so, yeah, I think I'm still going to take that suggestion anyway, at some point. But in the meantime, we do have these, and of course, you immediately look at these, actually we'll look at Roger Rabbit specifically first. When you look at which ones I was going to decide to do with what, like when you look at Roger Rabbit, the different things that can go with that. And the great thing that Roger Rabbit does in regards to blending its genres is that I felt like you can really go either way with it. You can go with another detective movie, or you can go with an animated movie. So like it was basically between The Great Mouse Detective, and I almost kind of considered Dick Tracy, because I almost kind of feel like they have the same sort of tone and just vibe about them. Despite the fact that there's no animation in Dick Tracy, it feels like it is. It feels like a very animated movie. But as much I will definitely want to talk about Dick Tracy at some point. But I went ahead with this because I guess because we're tying into the Disney theme this week. Why not? But there's also the whole thing about how like like Roger Rabbit is so in the whole sort of noir vibe that, to my understanding, the whole idea behind it is that there was, of course, one of the ultimate noir movies you think of outside of the 40s era would be Chinatown. And I think supposedly Chinatown was going to have two sequels, because after this came out, we did eventually get the Two Jakes. But then I guess there was going to be another sequel to Chinatown that never got made. So they basically just took the plot of what that Chinatown sequel would have been, and it's basically the vague outline of the plot of this movie, which is so its roots are just already in there immediately. And when you take all this in consideration, obviously, the first choice would have been Cool World, would have been your first comparison. But I mean, when you've got all these other options, just fuck Cool World. Just fuck it hard and fuck off completely. So, there's so much better things to talk about. So, let's start with Roger Rabbit specifically, which we've kind of already done, talking about its tone and where it comes from, and just the way it really blends all the different things it has going on. What I really love about it also, in regards to the blending, is how you're going to combine what Roger Rabbit's doing and what Bob Hoskins is doing and make it feel like they're in the same movie. And what's interesting is this isn't really something that the movie has to like build to and you have to kind of ease into. The movie handles that stuff so brilliantly that it's instantaneous. That there's like never a question that these two things may not have been there in the same moment. When you look at it, because obviously the technical achievement is where a lot of Roger Rabbit's reputation lies. Despite that it's mostly, I think, well known as a perfect movie by many, many standards. I know critics went absolutely insane for it. It got like 6 Oscar nominations. It won 3, on top of like just a special one in general for the achievement itself. But the way they're able to do like, because you've got Hoskins' world where, he's really hardened, he's sort of bent on revenge because Toon killed his brother. And it's like that in itself immediately brings Toons into the drama side of the whole thing. But at the same time, there's still something really funny about the way that they play it so straight. Like when they were talking about his brother's death, and they say they dropped a piano on his head, which of course is a very Toon-like thing to happen, and it's really funny, but they play it so straight when they say it, which makes it all the more funny, but also impressive that they can almost treat something a tune did so dramatically also. It's like they found just this perfect tone that you would think would be impossible to achieve. And somehow they just did it instantly without necessarily having to win the audience over. Because you win the audience over with the very first scene, where you play up like they're getting, like, when I saw this when I was younger, I always kept forgetting that the Baby Herman short at the beginning is part of the movie, and it's not like a separate thing prior to the movie, like you would see sometimes. So, I think there was even, this was one of those movies where when it actually came out in theaters in 1988, it had a short before it that was unrelated. But, the thing, though, is, in the way that we see how when Baby Herman comes to, like, it's his real life, and he's like a 50-year-old cigar-chomping actor that just storms off the set, and Roger is, like, begging to be hit with a refrigerator, which apparently has happened about 50 times at this point. And then just immediately that transition, because that short feels so much like something that actually exists as a standalone. But that transition just completely brings the world of this movie to you, and there's just no question about it from the get-go, which is just amazing. And then talking about combining the tones, you've got the logic of, like, the real world and what Hoskins is doing, and how there's logic in most of the things he does if he's not bent on revenge. But then on the other side of this, you've got scenes that are handled with tune logic. By that being stuff like when they're handcuffed together and Roger just slips his hand out. And Hoskins says, like, you know, you were able to do that the whole time. Why couldn't you have done that before? And he basically says he's only able to do it when it's funny. And then you just have to go with that logic. And then there's the other thing with the use of shaving a haircut. Which is everywhere, but this is easily by far, I think, the most brilliant use of it. Where Christopher Lloyd, playing Judge Doom, actually uses shaving a haircut to bring Roger Rabbit out of hiding, because he cannot do the first part of it without Roger Rabbit having to do the second part. It just cannot happen. Like, he literally will go insane if he doesn't finish it. And, like, merging these two logics is just one of my favorite parts about the whole thing, really. And I think another one of those things is just sort of, like, almost underlying in a way to where the blending of everything that's going on here is, like, seamless with stuff like that. So there's all that. And then there's sort of this movie was pushing boundaries in many ways. Technologically, obviously, but also content-wise a little bit, because of just the brilliance of this script, where you throw in, because it's obviously, you know, part animated movie, so in a sense part children's movie, but it's also got this other side to it that's like this hard-boiled noir movie, so they've still got to put those plot points in it. So they compromise in the middle, and we get stuff like the patty cake thing, where it's literal in the sense of what we're seeing, but the innuendo is played up so much that it could almost be played exactly as is. Like, at first you always think, like, did we have to see them, you know, playing patty cake in the pictures? But at the same time, it's like, yes, you really do, because we totally, the way they set it up, would have totally believed the movie just straight up went there with no filter. And that sort of once again, more part of the blending the two different kind of tones that are going on here, that ultimately somehow become one and the same. And then you've also got some one-liners in there with like him saying that Jessica was the cream in his coffee, and Valiant says something like, Acme's taking the cream now. I feel like there's something very, very walking the line here. Actually, not even walking the line, like jumping back and forth across it. But still, that's, yeah. And then, so I also like how sometimes there are moments in this movie where you can tell, I feel like I've done this a lot, like they talked about how, oh, the things movies do today and stuff like that, but yeah, here's another example of that. It's the moment, and yeah, the movie does kind of contradict this, but we'll get into that too. The moment when he's walked in on, and he's got his pants down, and somebody says the line, "I caught you with your pants down," and they just leave it at that. And it's like it's a obvious joke. It's kind of a childish joke, but there's something mature about the execution that they just left it as is. Because if that "caught with your pants down" joke was in a movie today, it would involve her saying, "I caught you with your pants down," full body scan, and then punctuated with "literally." But the movie doesn't do that, which I really love. Like I said, it's kind of a mature way to tell a childish joke, I guess you could say. With that said, yes, that is a bit contradicted when, actually in two cases. Number one, there's the scene in the movie theater when the whole "literally" thing is used. But at the same time, in that moment, the delivery is totally serious, which is why it works. But then, yeah, there is the whole explanation joke thing at the end with the kicking him in the balls when that's the rhyme, and it's like, hey, that doesn't rhyme with... And they pretty much spell that out, so it does contradict that, but in that particular moment, I still stand by. I like how they handled the pants down joke, so... And then, talking about the stuff that felt like really groundbreaking in the moment was the meshing of the Disney characters and the Warner Brothers characters, which is something I feel like we would never, ever, ever see now unless it involved Disney buying all of those characters, which it could with, you know, the change in its couch cushions, probably. But the great thing about this is the way they interact still, like, and the fact that, in a sense, I guess it almost kind of works in the movie's favor that is the way Disney is now, that you can never, ever imagine this kind of meshing ever again, because it just makes it within the movie so more unique, maybe even more so than it was at the time, which is great. So you've got, like, this scene that just kind of, is you're familiar enough with the movie, is just another scene, and you don't really think about it that way, like the scene where Donald and Daffy are, like, dueling pianos. And it's like, when you think about the fact that we'll probably never see that again, is just kind of insane. And the same thing with the parachuting, with Mickey on one side and Bugs on the other. It's really kind of insane and crazy to think about it now. So yeah, the movie will always have that, and like I said, with time, it probably seems even more crazy. So that's something that'll probably age well. And then, of course, we do have our villain. Now, of course, I guess technically it's a twist that he's the villain, but I mean, Judge Doom is one of those characters where the second he walks on screen, I mean, what else is he, if not a villain? Where Christopher Lloyd walks in, and he's just so damn sinister and so damn scary right away. Just with his presence alone and his appearance, let alone the fact that it is still in his introductory scene, when it's one of the more not only one of the most famous scenes in the movie, but something that a lot of people will talk about was one of the traumatizing things in movies from their childhood. I was seeing it at a young age, was dropping the shoe in the dip. That innocent shoe that was liquefied just to prove a point, and you can actually see him dripping off of Judge Doom's gloves, which is insane. And to think that... and it's hard to believe that this character could have apparently been crazier or more terrifying. Apparently, there was a time where Tim Curry was going to play him, but when he, like, auditioned or he read for them or something, they thought he was too terrifying, so they cast somebody else. It was Zemeckis working with Christopher Lloyd again after Back to the Future. I'm pretty sure, yeah, only the first Back to the Future would come out at this point, so that's... and then the whole thing about not blinking, he does that old trick that works wonders. Never really fails when you're building up how creepy somebody is. So yeah, despite his actions, like when we hear his real voice, which I think even all the way into adulthood will be something that never leaves you. Like, you can look back on maybe the shoe and say, like, oh, that was traumatizing as a child. You hear Judge Doom's real voice and you say, that's fucking traumatizing now. And it will be in the future, too. And then that's also kind of a thing of, like, almost like sort of the juggling of tones also, where it's like having a villain that is that dark and that's scary, especially when his true self comes out. And it's, yeah, like I said, this tonally could have and maybe should have been all over the place. But this movie is just so, I can't say that enough. It is so well put together. It's crazy. And that's the thing also, is not only is it doing all of this stuff, but as it goes on, it's got to build on itself. Like, it's got to do something to not run out of gas quickly. Because this is the kind of thing where, that's the problem with these really high concept movies, is once the concept is established, it'd be really easy to run out of movie before the movie is over. So this one has to keep building on itself, so there's this sort of transition where we've got the animated characters on top of the live-action backgrounds, and we're going to eventually transition by the climax of the live-action characters in the animated backgrounds. And in this transition, it basically shows that this movie had not just a willingness, but a duty, and not just to its audiences and people watching it, but to the movie itself, to maintain that magic that it's had throughout so far, has to delve into the surreal. It's inevitable that the surreal comes into this, and there's even different levels of surreal. You could say it's surreal to see the Warner Brothers characters interacting with the Disney characters. Like in one area you see like a Looney Tune, and then in the next second you're seeing Dumbo like in the window being fed peanuts. And like everything, like half of the stuff from Fantasia, I think is what they have, is what they say. And just all that stuff around. I think Pinocchio is in there. Like that's one level of surreal. And then there's the other level where we have all this imagery that's sort of meshing together, where we've seen Bob Hoskins like really set up this real world. And then the second he like pulls out a gun from Yosemite Sam, is so like we're really going in like a total sort of flip-flop direction, and but once again it somehow maintains its tone the whole time, which, like I said, and that's the thing, is when you're doing something like this, because we were talking about just yesterday with the new Lion King, to use as a convenient example, where the idea, it felt like the movie was a great idea as an experiment. Like doing that whole making it look real thing. But it's like, what if The Lion King had been able to look the way that it does, but also maintain the magic of the original movie? And Roger Rabbit takes this concept, and like I said, it's something that could have just been something more like Cool World, where it's like, yeah, you've got the concept and you've got the look, but then what? A shitty story, forgettable characters, and whatever the hell else was in that movie. I barely remember it at all. But with Roger Rabbit, not only do you have this incredible concept that was unlike anything we'd ever seen before, because yeah, there was the meshing in like Mary Poppins and Anchors Away and stuff like that, but this was like feature length into a whole other level, especially with putting the animated characters in the real world, and the way that they interact, and like sometimes they'll be grabbed by live action characters, and it's like, it's not necessarily just the camera just kind of staying in one place and they just put the animations around it. Everything's always moving, so they have to animate those characters to move with that. And it's like so incredibly, like you can't even begin to imagine where you start with a process like that. And so it's like, on top of that, we have just a good movie in general, a witty script, memorable characters, an engaging story, and actors like Bob Hoskins who embrace this so much, that whenever he interacts with any of these characters, it's just so incredibly believable. Where it's like so many actors could just phone this in or look like they don't know what the hell they're doing. Apparently there was one scene where Hoskins looked like straight ahead when he should have kind of been looking down. So they like changed it to where Roger's standing on like his toes to line him up. And that's like the one time I think there was something they had to fix. But everything else, like everything Hoskins was doing was so on point, and so believable with him interacting with them. It's sort of like those stories you hear about when actors interact with the Muppets. and it's basically like they're talking to real people. But actors like Bob Hoskins in this are working with stuff that's not there at all. Apparently they had like cutouts every now and then. But still, I mean, to get the convincing performance that Bob Hoskins has here, especially since like over half the characters he interacts with are animated. So yeah, so all of that just comes together perfectly, and like I said, had plenty of Oscar success. Most notably, winning editing is a really big deal for a movie like that. So, and then obviously, technical stuff, and like I said, it got a cinematography nomination as well, and then, like I said, just kind of a special, like an honorary one also, just on the achievement itself. So, that in itself speaks volumes, so, yeah. And I didn't even go into, like, some of the, like, cultural icons some of these characters are, like Jessica Rabbit. There are so many people I know. I never really got into the whole being really, really into animated characters thing, but yeah, I do know a lot of people that have said that Jessica Rabbit, like, awakened them more or less. And both guys and women I know have said this, so to great length. So yeah, so that's how I feel about that. It's not a movie that I've seen like a bunch of times. Like, it's obviously when a lot of people talk about Roger Rabbit, they're talking as people that have seen this movie over and over and over and over again. It's not really a movie I grew up with. When I grew up with it, I only saw it in maybe snippets. It was only later that I saw it, and I've only seen it all the way through, maybe a handful of times. But I mean, even not having, really grown up on it and not necessarily knowing it front to back, it's impossible not to admire just the achievement that it is, on top of the fact that they were able to make a great movie in itself out of it. Like I said, should have been a tonal mess, but it's actually tonal perfection. It's like completely on the other side, so yes, so let's go on to a movie that I did grew up with, I have seen a billion times, and I do know front to back, and that is The Great Mouse Detective, one of the more underrated movies, and just really the Disney canon in general. And I like that it's kind of gotten slowly like a rising reputation as it goes on. So this was like right before The Little Mermaid. It was like 3 years before The Little Mermaid, before Disney really like took off again. So I feel like it kind of just barely missed that whole thing to take off and become like as much a part of pop culture as the stuff following it. But I feel like it's just as worthy as a lot of those. It just, yeah, because I know when you look at those and you look at the creativity in them, it might seem like kind of a basic story, where it's just a Sherlock Holmes mystery, but it just happens to be a mouse that lives in a hole in Sherlock's apartment or whatever. So there is something still very clever in that concept, and the way they were able to get like that. I think it's like a snippet of Basil Rathbone doing like a reading or something that they put within that dialogue to make it for the scenes that show that Holmes does have a presence here. We just never really full on see him. He's just background noise more or less. So yes, and the first thing you'll notice when it begins is the title, depending on how many different versions of this you've seen. Because if you saw it on like VHS a billion times like I did, you might remember the title coming up as The Adventures of the Great Mouse Detective. Apparently when it was in theaters, it just said The Great Mouse Detective, and then it changed for video, and then since this DVD and Blu-ray came out, they've changed it back to where it just says The Great Mouse Detective again. So I don't really know what that's about. It's almost like, I would almost think the Adventures thing would be setting up like what they thought could have been like a potential franchise or something. I don't know, I'm just guessing. But yeah, so I would say unfortunately that didn't happen, but I do kind of just like, this probably works so much better as a standalone, quite honestly. Especially with some of the characters like Ratigan, that you just can't replicate, and you can't replicate Vincent Price's performance. And his personality is so much a part of this movie that it's much better as just a standalone, really. And another character, which is now there is a character in this movie I feel like I could talk endlessly about. And I think that says something about how rich all of the characters are in this movie, because they absolutely are. But I feel like I could write a book. I feel like I feel like I could do a whole video on Fidget, just by himself. And the great thing about Fidget is he's largely responsible for the tone of this movie, despite just being Radigan's sidekick. Because when it begins and we get this shot outside Flowersham's shop, there is something sort of looming over. Like, we know this is where whatever the story's going to take off and do is going to start here. And so it's like this sort of dark night, and it feels like it's really late, and things are getting, like I said, just kind of darker and more sinister around them. And then Fidget bursts through this window, and it's terrifying. And he's here to take Flowersham and take him, at the time, God knows where. And then almost every other time we see Fidget, he's the funniest character in the movie. He's like slapsticking around, he's doing the whole comedy relief thing, he's just a bumbling idiot. But the interesting thing about this, and why I say he's responsible for the whole movie's tone, is that they somehow managed to, this is something else that these two have in common, is the way they manage this, the different tones going back and forth, is that they're able to make Fidget terrifying and then hilarious, and then switch back to terrifying and switch back to hilarious pretty much whenever they please, whenever the scene calls for it. And one does not take away from the other. When he bursts through the window, it's terrifying. When he's bumbling around and he's got his list, it's anything involving his list is hilarious to me. The way he goes down it, the way he checks it off, everything like that. But then, shortly after this, we have the scene that's terrifying again, when he's upside down in the window, just staring at Olivia. Which, in a sense, obviously, in that moment, the tone changes, because suddenly he's bumbling again and he falls. But that shot of Fidget in that window, I think, is the reason I'm still today terrified of windows when it's dark out. I don't, blinds and curtains are my best fucking friend, and I'm pretty sure it's because of Fidget. And for that one moment, and like I said, it still transitions back to comedy in that very moment that terrified me. And like I said, then the next time we see him, he's funny again. Then the next time we see him, he's hiding in the bottle in Olivia's clothes. Kind of terrifying again, and it just goes back and forth, but every time, he's always scary when he needs to be scary, and he's always hilarious when he's supposed to be funny. And that's, I don't know what else you can say. The baby carriage. Good God. The baby carriage in the toy store. When he sits up again. That's reminiscent of when he busts through the window. Terrifying. And then shortly before or after that is when he's bouncing off singing. Which is hilarious. How do they do this? I don't know. By the way, his voice is by Candy Candido, I think is who it is, who, number one, has had a voice career that spanned, like, decades. But the main thing you might know him for is he's the tree that gets pissed off at Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. Are you hinting my apples aren't what they ought to be? I'm pretty sure that's him. But the thing is his voice is deep enough that when he's Fidget, it's actually his voice sped up. Which in a sense makes it even funnier whenever he talks, to know that he's, like, actually physically sped up. But yes, so long story short, Fidget is an invaluable asset to why this movie succeeds, and I just want to put that out there. The way when he taunts Olivia in the bottle, and then the way he walks away from the bottle, just makes me laugh like an idiot every single time I see it. And I've already alluded to how many times I've seen this. But, anyway, that's my praise of Fidget. So, we can go on. And so, these scenes when we meet Basil for the first time, after we've already met Dawson and Olivia, and we know right off that Dawson is going to be his Watson. And they play up these home scenes that we know. He's got the violin, he's got, you know, all the contraptions, he's got the mannerisms, the way of speaking, all that. And that character in general, and the voice work is amazing also. And it's like, you would think he would be overshadowed by what Vincent Price is doing as Radigan, but no, Basil is just as much of an engaging character in a totally different way. And I'm really glad they weren't able, they didn't lose that. When they, like, almost by putting too much focus on Radigan, because once Radigan's introduction is so long, but it's so amazing you don't even realize that. But it's like he's telling us about Radigan, and then we transition to him. We learn what his plan is, and we learn what he has Flavisham building, and then he goes through that whole thing, and then he comes out and he gives Fidget the list. And I do love that moment when he comes out, and it's like it shows the back and forth of Radigan's personality, where one minute he can be, he's so incredibly evil and threatening. The way he, like, crushes the music box and, like, his veins pop out. And then he screams at Flavisham, but then the first thing he does when he walks out is say, like, oh, it's so fun being nasty, or something like that. The perfect Vincent Price port. So then he gives that, he goes out there, he gives the list to Fidget, and then after that, we go into his whole musical number, which has multiple layers to it, which has the scene with the harp, where it goes from the blue to the red to show, like I said, the back and forth of that personality. Then the kind of terrifying moment when he actually kills somebody. He brings the cat out, and we watch Bartholomew die. And not only does he die, we watch the other guys mourn him. The one guy takes his hat off, the other guy starts crying, and then in fear for their lives, they set up this whole song all over again. And then once that reaches its absolute peak, is when we finally cut back to Basil. And it's like, in this moment, in all of that long thing, we could almost totally lose sight of how crucial and amazing of a character our hero is. That could have totally and completely consumed us into only wanting to see Radigan again. But these characters are so well done, and so likable, and so memorable, that it's great bouncing back and forth. We're ready to also see the mystery unravel once we cut away from Radigan, but then it's so incredibly rewarding also when he comes back too. So there is that. So yeah, just all of that is why that stands out also, because this is also something where it could have kind of just hinged on its concept. But no, the fact and they could have basically just really said, like, obviously, yeah, he's so much like Holmes, and Dawson's so much like Watson, but they also absolutely feel like they're individual characters, without just seeming like, oh yeah, he's obviously supposed to be that, and he's always supposed to be that. No, we see Basil and Dawson. We're not just constantly thinking, like, yeah, we might as well just call him Holmes, we might as well just call him Watson, it doesn't matter what their names are. No, we always get a sense that they are their own individual characters, even when they're doing the flat-out Holmes scenes. Like when he is able to decipher that Dawson is a military surgeon that just came back from Afghanistan. I'm not sure how the hell Dawson travels, travels that great of distance, but that's a mystery in itself. So, yes, so, but on top of all this great character stuff, and on top of just the great idea, we've got these amazing settings. Like, just the way it shows off, the city itself, even if it's from, like, this very download perspective. But we've also got stuff like that nightmarish toy store is insane. And then we've got to the whole thing with Big Ben. We'll go into the Big Ben thing a little later, but there's also the way the songs and the score are used. The songs themselves kind of, once again, build up on... Like, I almost forget that there's as little songs as there are in this movie. I think there's, like, what, 3? There's Radigan's number, there's Let Me Be Good to You, and there is Goodbye So Soon. Is that it? Because the movie kind of feels like a musical a little bit. But those songs make such an impression, I guess, that you kind of convince yourself the whole movie is practically a musical. But the thing about that is when you look at, say, Radigan's song, like we were just talking about, and how that, not only is it so big, and it's like, it's one of my personal favorite villain songs, probably, at least in the Disney canon, but the thing about that also is the way it is so sort of jovial about itself. It's like everything in Radigan's personality. It's so jovial about itself until you listen to the lyrics. Where it's like the song itself and how, big and grand it looks is like what Radigan is on the outside, but then we know that he's actually the really evil, rat at his core. And that's basically the lyrics, because you've got, the champagne flying everywhere and the chandeliers. But then one of the lyrics is him talking about how he's going to be worse than he's ever been before. And when they're singing with him, they back him up with worse than the widows and orphans you drowned, is one of the actual lyrics. He's saying in this song, he has drowned widows and orphans, and he's about to get worse, is what this song is about. That's so damn happy about itself. And, like, that just sums up his personality and character so eerily perfectly. And then you go on and you've got the Let Me Be Good to You number, which is really funny in the sense that apparently, from what I read, they were trying to censor this scene because they thought it was too revealing and risque and all that. But I guess the defense to get them to pass it was the fact that she's a mouse and she's not a human, so it's not as bad. And the censor was like, alright, you got us. That's the way I've heard it anyway. And then Goodbye So Soon is just this amazing moment where Vincent Price really gets to, just being on like a record player, gets to sort of bask in just the jovial evil that is Radigan in that song. As he's literally counting down, because when the record stops, obviously, is when the trap will go off. So he's literally, like, in a very happy manner, counting down their death by singing this song, when he's not even present physically. So that's perfect also. And then the score has always kind of stood out, where it's exciting when it needs to be, but there's also portions of it that have stood out to me in the sense of the music box. Where the music box comes back in 3 different ways. Because there's the first scene when we see it dancing and it's playing that little tune. And then when Dawson finds Olivia crying and trying to figure out where Basil is, and she's finding comfort in him. That score that's playing is the music box score. It's just a little grander. And then there's the other time when they put a sinister turn on it, when it's the same tune, and then as Radigan starts to squeeze it and is about to break it, it sort of transitions into this more sinister tone. And I always love that. It's, once again, one of those things that really kind of shows the evil of Radigan without him actually doing anything. It's speaking for him. I say not doing anything, as he's literally squeezing this thing to death. But still, yeah, and also, I also forgot that moment when he realizes that Fidget fucked up, and he looks like where he's practically about to explode, like, physically. There's so many characters in this I just cannot get enough of, and I could go on and on about. But another thing about it being lively with interesting undertones is the animation itself is, like, so lively. And like the whole movie more or less feels like this, constant sort of excitement. Like I said, even when it's basking in its evil, it's being so, grand about it. But the interesting thing is the animation is so lively. There's something about this movie that you would think would take away from that never does, because I don't think it's something a lot of people even realize. The entire movie from beginning to end is set at night. There is the sun. The sun is not in this movie at all. Everything looks really dark, really dreary. It's raining a lot. Yet the animation still feels so lively all the time. It's crazy. And then they're also... I was talking about a bit of a balance here also. With the movie kind of taking on just kind of a Holmes approach to its story in general, where it's like a genuine mystery with genuine dark villains, but at the same time it is a Disney movie for children, so you need a balance. And single-handedly, pretty much, I think that's Toby. Because you can really sense a tonal change whenever Toby's around, and the movie gets a bit more childlike. And I don't mean that in a bad way, by any means. Because, like I said, it really kind of shows the balance of it, where everything is pretty much sort of played straight, unless, there's a funny line or something like that. Or maybe every now and then a physical gag, like him sitting on the violin. But for the most part, we've got stuff like I said, all the stuff where Fidget's creeping everybody out, Basil's, like, rapid-fire dialogue, all the stuff with Radigan. There is something that feels a bit mature about what the movie's doing, And then Toby comes in, and, you know, Toby's doing the whole thing where, like I said, there's almost something childlike about it. There's, like, you know, the little music cues and stuff like that. And there's something a lot more light whenever Toby is here. Almost like he's, like, the child's perspective of the movie. But, so it's like that. And then, of course, he has his own opposite with, what is her name? Felicia, the giant cat that ate Bartholomew, that meets her own terrible, horrible end. But... yeah, so that pretty much goes on, and the story has a really nice flow to it. The movie's like really short, like an hour and 15 minutes, and then we go through all this, and I forgot another thing I love about Ratigan, which is kind of one of the ultimate villain moments, is the whole thing it's building up to, where they're both trying to outsmart each other, and then Basil goes through this whole plan of going through disguise, figuring out, you know, the whole thing with the list and how, you know, there's salt water in it, so they have to go here, they have to go to this seedy place, then they have to go through the whole bar fight thing, they have to go through all the tunnels, and then they finally have outsmarted Ratigan. They found where he is, they found his hideout, and he's been waiting for him the whole time, and he even has a party set up just to throw it in his face, to the point that it completely and totally breaks Basil's spirit. As far as villain moments go, that is up there. That is just absolutely perfect. Which, of course, like I said, takes us to the whole amazing scene that combines the whole Holmes quality of being able to dismantle and look things over and figure things out, while Ratigan has set them up in what is essentially a saw trap. Which he finds a brilliant way out of, and then the whole posing for the picture as just sort of a final fuck you. That whole scene is brilliant. Now, that eventually takes us to the climax of the movie. After the whole thing of him taking the queen over and then getting found out and thwarted by Basil. Now, normally this would be when we end, but this movie's climax is so phenomenal, I can hardly explain it. This movie, as far as, like I said, at least the Disney canon or animated movies in general, this climax is so stunning on so many levels. Because we start off, and we've got the aerial chase, and then that stops with them crashing into Big Ben, and then the inside of Big Ben is doing something that, at the time, we had not seen before, where they were combining the regular animation, the classic animation of the characters, on top of the computer animation that was the inside of Big Ben, because that's the only way they could do it. And it was just this really sort of groundbreaking thing in the moment, and just really just shows you the size and scope of this scene. It's like the absolute perfect place to have the climax of this movie. And then on top of that, you have the ultimate final arc in Ratigan, when he's been thwarted one too many times now. It's piling on a little too much. So this whole sort of facade he has, where he freaks out whenever somebody calls him Rat, because he's, you know, this sophisticated being. He's got, you know, his suit and his hair slicked back and all that. And then once he gets trapped in the gear and rips off the suit, and we see like him go into an entirely different form, and he goes full-on rat and full-on animalistic, is insane. But like I said, something they've been building to the whole time with his character, and makes him this final gigantic threat, where once he and Basil are outside, it is this genuinely brutal beating. We're watching the hero, the mouse hero of this animated Disney movie that's pretty much made for children, as the claws come out literally, and he is hitting Basil with everything that he's got. It's really interesting to me that they were really worried about getting PG instead of the G they ended up with, and the thing that was preventing that was the "let me be good to you" scene, and not this. but still, and then that final moment that I really love, where the movie kind of gives you a bit of a gut punch in this final fight, when you have the moment, the classic moment, when the hero is dangling and the villain is above them. And it's like, this is the moment where somehow the villain will fall and the hero will find his way back up, and all will be good. And so when they do this thing where Ratigan builds up like his final blow, that's when you expect something is going to offset this. Like, maybe Dawson or somebody is going to take action. Something is going to come in and stop this from happening. And then it's such a gut punch when he actually is able to hit Basil in the face and knock him off this thing. It's like the last thing you expect with that kind of build-up. And even Ratigan, in that moment, this is what kills Ratigan. Because this moment has him absolutely convinced that he's won. And that was his mistake. He let his guard down in that one moment, forgetting that he was standing on Big Ben just as it was about to go off again. Which, of course, is the recreation of the whole Holmes and Moriarty going over the waterfall thing, which is the kind of the perfect way to reenact that in a movie. Like, it's brilliant the way they tied that in. I love that so much. I love this whole movie so much. I said, I can't... This climax is so damn spectacular. I can't believe it. So... and then the great ending that kind of sets up that he and Dawson will now be this thing, as Olivia goes on her way and a new person's brought in. Like I said, it's almost like they were setting up the franchise thing before that was like an immensely popular thing to do with stuff like this. But in the meantime, this is what we have. Like I said, really works perfectly as a standalone movie. So as you could probably see here, it's really hard to say because Who Framed Roger Rabbit is this cultural phenomenon, broke so many technological barriers, made this whole thing. It's so it's still to this day, sort of unbelievable that a movie like that existed, especially at the time that it did. And the immensely incredible minds, brilliant minds that went into making all of that from the ground up. But if I have a personal preference, and yeah, there is the whole thing of I grew up with one, not so much the other, but The Great Mouse of Day was just a movie that, like I said, really still, it's slowly getting there, but still isn't quite getting the credit that it really absolutely needs. And it's always been one of my favorites in the Disney canon. Like, we're talking, like, top 3. Like, I'm thinking, unless I'm really forgetting something major, personally for me, it would probably be The Lion King, Snow White, this. And I know there's a lot of beloved stuff out there, and I've talked about most of it in previous videos, so, yeah, I'm pretty sure I can probably stand by that, quite honestly. I just, like I said, and maybe with all the creativity we've seen since, and all the directions they've gone, the boundary-pushing directions they've gone with stuff like Hunchback of Notre Dame, for instance, it just really... Like I said, and it might seem basic by comparison, but I just love absolutely every second of it and can't get enough of it. So, well, obviously it's my personal preference, but that's the way things go. So we're going to end this here. As I've been saying, the next Versus is going to be True Romance and Natural Born Killers to celebrate the arrival of the new Tarantino, which we will talk about, I'm sure, at great length. And yes, tomorrow is the end of Big Little Lies as well. So yes, and then that will wrap up July, and then we'll see whatever the hell August is doing. Probably not a whole lot. August usually doesn't because it's just opening the door to award season is what August is doing. So and then we'll be getting to that. So until all that stuff, that's it for this.